This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all from the Pune chapter of IIDVL. Today is the death anniversary of our beloved teacher, Dr. M.B. Gharpure sir, who guided and mentored so many of us with relentless dedication and commitment. His contribution to dermatology is unmatched and inspiring to all of us. We remember and miss him not only today, but in our daily lives. Today also marks the anniversary of our team as office bearers. In the last 1 year, we tried our best to connect with you all through our virtual monthly CMEs and hope that our interaction soon becomes in person. In today's CME, we have case presentations on mimickers in dermatology, and the highlight of the CME is oration by none other than Dr. Anil Patki sir. So, without any further ado, I would like to welcome our president, Dr. Dhanishri Bide ma'am, for the welcome note.
So, good evening, dear friends and colleagues. On behalf of my team, I welcome you all for today's CME on mimickers in dermatology. Today's day is really special for us. As Dr. Ritu has said, it is the death anniversary of our beloved teacher, respected Dr. Gharpure sir. So, we all pay our tribute and respects to this great personality who has played very crucial role in shaping up the careers for most of us. We were fortunate to be actually associated with him, but we many of us have learned indirectly from sir lot of things other than dermatology also. So with this, by paying our tribute to this sir, we begin our today's CME. This day is again special because our EC took over on 12th of June last year on a virtual meeting platform, and since then every month we have been conducting regular CMEs on different topics. Plus, we have also conducted a cultural program by active participation of our members. We have observed Vitiligo Day, we have observed Leprosy Day, and we have also observed Psoriasis Day by doing different patient related activities. And we have also prepared three brochures on these three important topics in English and Marathi language, which are really useful in the clinic for our patients. So they are also available on our website for download. Most of the paperwork and other activities we have completed, and today we have one more good news which I won't be sharing with you now. That will be told to you all in the end by Dr. Rashmi Soni. So please stay tuned till the end for this meeting. Though it is a night meeting, the topics are interesting, and we have chosen this particular topic today because when I was a student, it was syphilis which was the greatest mimicker. Leprosy was again another mimicker that time, but now in this COVID era, we find that different rashes in patients who suffered from COVID, who have taken various medicines, they are mimicking the other conditions like say vasculitis or maybe the drug induced rashes. So it is again a dilemma right now for all of us when we are dealing with these post COVID patients. So this topic will be definitely useful in our practice, and we have invited three eminent speakers today for this CME. First speaker is Dr. Sharvari Pandit, and Sharvari is keenly, though she is from young generation dermatologist, she has keen interest in clinical dermatology, and she is working with Taude sir and other senior doctors. So her experience will definitely be useful to us. Second speaker is Dr. Nitin Chaudhary, and he has again a vast experience in teaching because he's into a teaching hospital for a long time, so his experience will be again useful. And third one is Dr. Dhananjay Damle. Dhananjay was a teacher in Sassoon hospitals, and after that he is now into private practice. He has a huge practice, all of us know, and definitely his experience during this COVID time will add value to our CMA today. After the three presentations, we are going to have oration by none other than our beloved teacher, Patki sir. Patki sir needs no introduction. We are honored to hear from him his experience in the field of leprosy. He had delivered this oration in the International Leprosy Congress a few months back, but most of us could not attend that. So we have requested him to present it again for all of us. So with this brief introduction, I would now like to hand over the proceedings to Dr. Ritu Chobe. So over to you, Dr. Ritu.
Thank you, ma'am. Before we begin the session, I would like to go through the housekeeping rules again, and I would like the audience to keep their videos on switched off mode and their mics muted. I would also request you all to post your queries in the chat box, and your questions will be addressed at the end of the last presentation. Starting with the case presentations, our first presentation is by none other than Dr. Sharvari Pandit. She's a consultant dermatologist and owner at Pandit Clinic and a consultant dermatologist at Joshi Hospital, Sanjeevan Hospital, and Ramakrishna Math Poly Clinic. She's also an honorary consultant at Police Hospital Shivaji Nagar and at State Reserve Police Force Hospital, Pune. Over to you, Sharvari.
Thank you, Ritu. Good evening, everyone. I'll start sharing my screen.
तो मिरर कवर करा.
Today, I shall be sharing a few cases where I had a bit of trouble with initial diagnosis. The histology proved me wrong and it helped me with the better treatment outcome. I shall directly move to the first case. So this is a 40-year-old male patient who presented in OPD with these fast-growing lesions over his face. The lesions were present over cheeks, lip corner, and lower lip. These started 2 weeks ago as small papules and started growing rapidly in size then after. The lesions were asymptomatic at the presentation. So on actual examination, these were large exophytic growths. They were erythematous. It had a well-defined border. There was mild crusting at the center of the lesion. These were firm, they were rubbery, non-tender, and they were non-compressible. Another lesion, a little smaller one, was noted here on the lower lip. And there was another small lesion here, which was just a crust. This was present on the lower lip. So the patient gave history of road traffic accident about 3 weeks ago. He suffered injuries with iron chains over his face. He had his post-accident photo with him. He happened to show it to me. So there were some contused lacerated wounds and some abrasions. Some of his wounds were sutured. Others were dressed and left to heal on their own. So when I was examining these, the lesions were exactly at the site of trauma. What I thought these could be, one was maybe a deep fungal infection through fungal inoculation, or a rare presentation of a fast-growing keloid, some acute granulomatous infection, or a vascular tumor or hemangioma. Actually, I could not make any confirmed fixed diagnosis. We decided to send these small tissue pieces for histopathological evaluation. So while the biopsy, we were waiting for the reports of histopathological examination, I was following up with the patient over WhatsApp teleconsultations. So this was the patient's photo after, say, about 4-5 days, and another photo, say, a week after we did his biopsy. So we had just given him amoxicillin and clavulanic acid and NSAIDs post his biopsy. we noticed that the lesions were shrinking with amoxicillin clavulanic acid. This was the patient's histopathological evaluation. The dermis is showing dense proliferation of variably sized ovoid-shaped capillaries and infiltrate around the blood vessels. The HPE concluded it was a case of bacillary angiomatosis. So macrolide are the drug of choice for Bartonella. I put the patient on clarithromycin for 14 days and the patient healed with minimal scarring. So, actually, bacillary angiomatosis is commonly found in HIV patients, is rare in adult immunocompetent patients. Only a few cases were reported. The treatment turned out very simple and the resolution of lesions was very fast. It could be done because of histopathological evaluation. I shall move to the next case. She is a 47-year-old patient who actually visited the OPD with complaints of hair fall. While I was examining her for her hair fall, I noticed these lesions on the left preauricular area. The patient was not at all bothered about them. They were asymptomatic lesions. She said they were growing slowly, but she was not concerned about them basically. I suggested that we should investigate this further. I suggested we should do a biopsy, but the patient denied. So I just gave her some hair fall treatment and the patient left the OPD. She came back to me after about 2 months and she complained. So the hair fall problem was secondary and she complained that there was some disturbed sensation over these two lesions, especially this lower one. So let's have a closer look at these lesions. So this is the lesion number 1. This is the newer lesion. This is the lesion number 2. This is the old lesion. So according to the patient, the lesion number 2 was previously like this, like a few months ago. The lesion slowly progressed from 1 to 2. When I examined these lesions, they were non-tender, they were slightly indurated, they look plaque-like. There were some atrophic areas here in the older lesion. The newer lesion was reddish brown. It had some ill-defined margins at some places. It was not fixed to the underlying skin. I again could not diagnose this at all. I thought maybe it was morphia, or then because of issues with disturbed sensation, Hensen, or discoid lupus, or seborrheic keratosis. They were all vague diagnoses. But I decided to take a small, or maybe a scar. I decided to take a small punch from the lesion number 1, the newer lesion. This was the histopathological evaluation. It showed well to ill circumscribed non-melanocytic neoplasm made up of oval and spindle-shaped cells and filling up most of the deep reticular dermis. Between the cells of neoplasm are numerous thin fibrillary collagen fibers and some melanin. The impression was of neurotized melanocytic nevus. The differential diagnosis, the differentials included neurofibroma and dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans. It was advised to do the Melan stain and immunohistochemistry for CD34 and S100 protein. This was the immunohistochemistry report. The immunohistochemistry says it is CD34 positive and negative for Melan A and S100. So the impression was that this tissue was consistent with dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans. So the ideal treatment for dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans is either a wide local surgical excision or Mohs micrographic repair. In our case, we decided to go with the wide local excision. margin was kept about 3 to 4 centimeter as recommended. It was covered with a skin graft. So the final report, in the final report, the lesion was completely excised. The borders of the excisional biopsy were free from tumor cells, and the diagnosis of dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans was confirmed. This was just done before the lockdown last year. I was trying to follow up with the patient over WhatsApp teleconsultations. This is the photo she sent me a few months ago. I saw her a couple of weeks back. So this is how it was. So I was quite unsure if these new lesions, if they're lesions or they're pigmentations. So I suggested we could evaluate, but the patient is claiming that these lesions came up post-surgery when the graft was healing, and there were some hematomas and they have left. So she claims it is post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. I am unsure, but I'm following up with her sincerely. So I shall move to so this variant of dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans is described as a morphia-like atrophic sclerotic plaque without nodularity. So I was confused that I thought it was morphia. So maybe this was a variant of dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans. I shall move to the next case now. So she is a 65-year-old female patient. She came to the OPD with these annular erythematous lesions over face, and some of the lesions were there behind her ears. The lesions were asymptomatic. They were acute onset lesions about 2 weeks, and they were not treated. Again, the patient was, I actually suggested that we do a biopsy because this patient gave me a history of Covishield vaccination. So she had taken a dose of Covishield just about 3 weeks ago. And after 1 week after vaccination, these lesions started. I was quite wanting to know what's happening inside. So I was suggesting that we do a biopsy, but the patient denied. The patient insisted that she'll take some medicines, and I gave her some antihistamines. And actually, the lesions cleared in 2-3 weeks. I unfortunately don't have her photo, but I'd seen her after 2-3 weeks, and the lesions had cleared up completely. On the same day, actually, just after this patient walked out of the OPD, there was another patient who walked into the OPD. So here is this patient. So he is a 30-year-old male patient who came to the OPD with complaints of erythematous annular lesion over his arm. Another lesion was there on his face. And these lesions were, again, very acute, about 2 weeks. Similar history of Covishield vaccination, first dose, 3 weeks ago. So the lesion started a week after he got his first shot. And of course, he was telling me that these lesions happened post vaccination. The lesions were symptomatic. So he had pruritus, he had burning, and I could see some obvious scaling on his lesions. So luckily, this time the patient was ready for a biopsy. I sent this tissue for HP. I was very keen on knowing what this was. What I was thinking this could be was probably a vaccine-induced immune response or a drug eruption or acute form of granulomanular. So I received the HP report a week later, and this turns out to be borderline tuberculoid Hansen's disease in type 1, my type 1 reaction. So after reading the HP report, I realized how biased I was. Nowadays, we all tend to link everything to COVID or to COVID vaccines. And I thought that this was some post-COVID vaccine reaction. It actually was BT Hansen. And I somehow tried to ask the patient a lot in details if he had any lesion previous to the vaccines. I asked the wife if she could notice anything on his arm or his face that was there previously present. They both are strongly denying any lesion which was there previous to the vaccination. So I thought maybe it was the immune response that was induced after vaccination, and there was a pre-existing patch of Hansen, but it just got precipitated because of the reaction, and the patient actually reached out for consultation. So this was just a month after MBT. In the next case, she's a 30-year-old patient, visited the OPD with complaints of intensely pruritic lesions, which were present on her buttock, thigh, and a few lesions on the pubic area. The lesions were present on and off for about 6 to 8 months. She was treated with a lot of antifungals, topical antifungals and systemic both. She had not much relief. Of course, there used to be a temporary improvement in her lesions. The itching used to subside and the lesions used to pop up again. Frankly, I thought of this only one thing, that it could be tinea. So I gave her a course of Sporanox with Whitfield's ointment and antihistamines. The patient had a short-term relief, and the lesions, when I stopped the treatment, the lesions reappeared within 2 to 3 weeks after I stopped the treatment. So I decided I will take a biopsy. So a small punch was taken from her buttock lesion, and the impression of the biopsy was a psoriasiform dermatitis. The biopsy also mentioned tinea incognito as one of the differentials, but the patient was never on any topical corticosteroids before I did the biopsy. I actually stopped all the treatments before I did her biopsy. So the antifungals were stopped, and the patient never used any OTC. She was a very well educated patient. So I decided I'll do a KOH to reconfirm if I had missed out on something. So the KOH was negative. I finally, very reluctantly, started the patient on Dezonide and antihistamines. And this is how she started responding. So she's like this now over the last 2 to 3 weeks. I have sent the tissue for fungal culture, and report is awaited. I'm also waiting to see what happens after the corticosteroid withdrawal. This is how the lesions improve with Dezonide. Lockdown is a mindset. Some use it and some abuse it. I sincerely thank Pune IDVL team for taking tremendous efforts towards continued medical education, being of great value and service to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharvari, for an excellent case presentation.
Thank you, Ritu.
Because of some prior commitments, Dr. Sharvari would be leaving us after answering all the questions. So,
If I can.
so coming on to the questions, the first question is, in the case of DFSP, was there any imaging done to
No.
see the extent of
No.
the spread? Was there any lymphadenopathy?
No image.
Was there?
There was no lymphadenopathy.
But there was no MRI, nothing done.
No.
To see the spread.
The patient did not present with any other symptoms. And the patient we had actually asked the patient if at all there is any little tiny thing also going wrong with her, she should report immediately. We also consulted with a cancer surgeon, the oncosurgeon. He suggested to wait.
There is one more question on the same note. Like the follow-up is only clinical, or would you be following it up with repeated biopsies? Maybe.
I actually wanted to do her repeat biopsy last week when she came, but she's not very keen. So
no, but what is the recommendation? Like, should we be doing it every 6 months, 1 year, like that, or
no? So they recommend that the follow-up has to be every 6 months.
every 6 months on clinical examination as well
On
as
clinical examination. On clinical examination.
and if there is a doubt, then a biopsy should be done. Okay. Ritu, you can go ahead.
Yes. So I think that brings us to the end of the first case presentation. And our second case presentation is by Dr. Nitin Chaudhary, sir. He's the professor and head of the Department of Dermatology, Venereology, and Leprosy at the Navale Medical College and General Hospital. He is also an MD examiner for MUHS, Rajiv Gandhi University, Gujarat University, D.Y. Patil University, and KIMS, Karad University. He has 22 publications in national and international journals, and he is also the recipient of ISPD Award 2014 for the best original article on pediatric dermatology in 2014. And he's also received the IJDVL Award for the best clinical image for pediatric tuberous xanthoma in 2014. Over to you, sir.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen.
Dr. Nitin, first open your presentation in the background and then share the screen. You can stop share and share it again.
Yes, I'm trying that. To karna hai. Okay, I'm audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm starting with my first case. Is a 31-year-old married female, housewife by occupation, and came to dermatology OPD with chief complaints of multiple painful pus-filled lesions over both breast, abdomen, and back since last 6 months, and it was associated with yellow-colored discharge. She is known case of rheumatoid arthritis on weekly methotrexate 15 milligram as well as hydroxychloroquine 300 milligrams for last 3 months. There was no history of fever, weight loss, abdominal pain, chronic cough, no history of trauma. There was also no history of any discharging granules. On clinical examination, there were multiple erythematous papules and plaques studded with pustules and crusting on few lesions, and discharge was devoid of granules, and atrophic scars and sinuses were present. So this is the clinical picture showing the lesions on the front and back of the trunk. There are multiple papules as well as pustules. So the clinical diagnosis was considered first was actinomycosis, second was cutaneous tuberculosis, and deep fungal infection. Then we investigated her routine investigations were within normal limits. For biopsy, we did hepatitis B, it was also negative. Von-Tuch's test was negative. Chest X-ray and HRCT thorax was also normal. So we also did the routine other investigations like saline soap gauze was kept overnight for collection of granules as we are suspecting of deep fungal infection. Pus for bacterial culture and fungal element was also negative. Gram stain was also negative. AFB stain showed some AFB bacilli with neutrophils, and KOH mount was also negative. But the histopathology came to our rescue, and we got on histopathology we found that there were psoriasiform elongation of retrorages along with lymphocytic infiltrate, and granulomas were seen. Granulomas were composed mainly of Langerhans cell macrophages, mixed inflammatory infiltrate were observed. And AFB smear also showed the AFB, acid-fast bacilli. And this is the histopathological picture of high power view showing granuloma with mixed inflammatory infiltrate. On LJ culture was done on Lowenstein-Johnson medium, and it showed smooth white colored colonies, and the colony smear showed abundant acid-fast bacilli. Sabaros dextrose agar showed no growth. But on further investigation, on specific investigations, we found that on doing TB PCR was suggestive of atypical mycobacteria. And also further investigations by MALDI TOF, we found that it was Mycobacterium abscessus subspecies. And it is a rapid grower, atypical mycobacteria, and the organism was susceptible or sensitive to linezolid, clarithromycin, amikacin, tobramycin, tigecycline, and cotrimoxazole. So the final diagnosis was atypical mycobacteria cutaneous infection caused by Mycobacterium abscessus. So it was unusual presentation of atypical mycobacterial infection, which was mimicking actinomycosis. And we treated the patient with clarithromycin 500 milligrams 2 times in a day for 3 months, along with linezolid 600 milligrams twice a day for 3 months, along with topical mupirocin. We could not give her amikacin because of lack of consent. And she was later again referred back to rheumatologist for her treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, where she was started now on leflunomide. So I'm showing her post-treatment photographs. So you can see after 3 months of treatment, all the lesions have completely subsided. There is no discharge, and it is showing just post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. So this was the case which was thought to be of actinomycosis, but it turned out to be atypical mycobacterium infection. Now the second case is of 32-year-old male, and he had multiple asymptomatic lesions on face, neck, and back since last 10 years. There were no complaints associated with lesions, no family history of similar lesions. On the clinical examination, you can see there are multiple papules, and there are some yellowish papules. So also similar lesions were seen on the back. So the clinical diagnosis we kept was eruptive xanthoma, eruptive collagenoma, and mucinosis. Again, routine investigations did not get to any particular diagnosis. Even lipid profile was also normal. On histopathological examination, we saw that on epidermis showed follicular plugging, and many mature grouped adipocytes were distributed around the eccrine glands as well as blood vessels in the reticular dermis. The reticular dermis was thickened with haphazardly arranged thickened collagen fibers. Many elastic fibers are vertically oriented, thickened, and forming interfacing bands without showing signs of degeneration. Moderate amount of mucin appeared to be deposited in the papillary dermis and superficial reticulodermis. So the final histopathological diagnosis was connective tissue nevus. So this is the picture, histopathological picture showing elastic bands as well as thickened collagen fibers. So we missed the diagnosis, and no further treatment was given. Then the third case is 23-year-old female patient came to dermatology OPD with chief complaints of rough asymptomatic growth over both nipples since last 12 months. There was no history of pruritus, pain, as well as no discharge. So this is the clinical picture showing brown to black verrucous irregular papules and plaques on both the nipples. They were non-indurated, non-tender, and non-adherent to the underlying structure. So the arrow is showing that there is irregular papular growth. So our diagnosis initial was verruca vulgaris, but it was unlikely because it was bilateral. Then verrucous epidermal nevus, nevoid hyperkeratosis of nipple, and sometimes nipple eczema can appear because of the friction. Routine investigations were all within normal limits. On histopathology, we came to know that there was epidermis was showing hyperkeratosis and papillomatous hyperplasia with increased pigmentation in the basal layer, elongation of retal edges, and filiform interconnecting pattern. This clings to the diagnosis. And the dermis has dilated capillaries and only sparse perivascular lymphocytic infiltrate. So this is the histopathological picture on high power showing elongation of retal edges and filiform interconnecting pattern. So the final histopathological diagnosis was nevada hyperkeratosis of nipple. And we treated the patient on calcipotriol ointment 0.005% at night for 6 months, along with moisturizer in the form of Vaseline jelly once a day for next 6 months. And on treatment, you can see that all the lesions have subsided after the treatment of 6 months. And the last case is of 13-year-old female patient. She had complaints of multiple red-colored raised lesions on her face since last 2 months. There was no history of itching or burning sensation or photosensitivity or pain, and there was no history of consumption of any medicine or topical application before the appearance of the lesion. She went to many local practitioners who prescribed n number of treatment to her, topical antibiotics, topical antifungals, topical steroids, even systemic antifungals, but there was no change in her clinical picture. So this is the clinical picture showing the lesions mainly around erythematous papules and plaques around mouth, as well as on the nose, as well as on both upper eyelids, along with fine scaling. So we thought it may be lupus miliaris disseminata facie or periorifacial dermatitis or rosacea. And the picture was much modified because of the topical treatment she had received before coming to us. But the histopathology showed the epidermis, which had flattening of retal edges with atrophy. The infiltrate encroached into the follicular infundibulum with infundibular spongiosis, and the dermis showed tuberculoid granuloma involving superficial and reticular dermis. The granuloma consists of lymphocytes, epithelioid cells, numerous Langerhans giant cells, and plasma cells. The center of the granuloma showed neutrophilic dust sprinkle, and the periphery showed the abandon of fibroplasia and dilated capillaries. The rest of the dermis showed moderate, dense perivascular and periappendageal inflammatory infiltrate. And it was that histopathology was suggestive of granulomatous rosacea. So these are the histopathological pictures on 4x, 10x, and high power. This arrow is showing the large Langerhans cell, and this is the caseation. And the patient was treated with, initially we thought of treating her with doxycycline. We gave her doxycycline for 100 milligrams OD for 14 days, but she did not respond to treatment at all. So later on, we shifted the treatment after getting the histopathology report to isotretinoin 10 milligrams once a day for 30 days, along with roxithromycin 150 milligrams twice a day for 10 days, and even topical application of tacrolimus 0.1% for 30 days. And after this treatment, the lesions completely subsided after 45 days of treatment. So this was the case of granulomatous rosacea, which was mimicking lupus miliaris disseminata facie as well as perioral dermatitis. So that's all about all the 4 cases which we thought they are mimicking something, and they turned out to be something after histopathological examination. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for an excellent presentation. Now we move on to the last case presentation.
Nitin,
I'm stopping sharing.
yeah.
Stop sharing.
Is it visible, Ritu?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Our last case presentation is by Dr. Dhananjay Damle sir. Sir is an ex-associate professor at BJ Medical College, Pune. He is the immediate past president of the Pune chapter of IDVL and has been the organizing co-chair person for Dermacon 2020 and the past joint secretary for the Maharashtra branch of IDVL. Sir has 7 publication in index journals and has about 15 presentations at national IDVL conferences. And he's also a recipient of the award by Professor Senthamil Selvi Award for Best Published Work in Mycology at the National IDVL Conference held in Jaipur. And he has also contributed to a chapter in peptides and growth factor in cosmetic dermatology, a practical and evidence-based approach. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ritu, for that kind introduction. Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir. You can make it full screen, sir.
Yeah, just make it full screen. Right. So, good evening, everyone. Respected seniors, colleagues, and my dear friends. Now, after those 2 previous speakers who have highlighted very, very interesting mimickers in dermatology, it is now my turn to share with you a very interesting mimicker which I came across in my practice last year. Now, this particular case is something which is a very common case which most of you must have seen, must have managed also. So let's see how it tricked me last year. It was a time when it was a lockdown time, the first wave of COVID. This was the time when this particular patient presented to me with a teleconsult. She was a 71-year-old female who had a history of very itchy rash all over the body since 2 months. She was a known type 2 diabetic, hypertensive. On taking a history, there was no history of any preceding sore throat, fever or cough before the onset of this itchy rash. And barring the anti-diabetics and antihypertensives, there was no other new drug which was introduced very recently before the onset of this particular rash. Now, as far as clinical presentation goes, now it was very fortunate for me that the relatives of this particular patient, since the time the rash had appeared, had clicked good pictures and had shared it with me on my WhatsApp number. Now, this was a presentation, initial presentation of this patient where this rash, you can see that it is florid. It had started insidiously but had rapidly progressed to involve almost the entire body. This you can see that there's on the back, there are a lot of erythematous papules, some of them little bigger in size, coalescing in nature also. And at the same time, they were quite pruritic. This is the buttock area or the thigh region, similar rashes. So virtually the rash was involving the entire body. And also there were few lesions which were present on the lower half of the face. The morphology was almost identical. This was in the initial stages, but when the patient was referred for teleconsultation, the rash had changed its form. And in between, before the patient was presented to me, this patient had taken treatment from the general practitioner without much relief. She had been given or prescribed a lot of antihistamines. And as you all know that dental practitioners are very, very familiar with few of the topical steroids which were also given, which the patient had been using intermittently. It was not a regular usage, but she had tried to use it on and off as per the need. And despite that, there was no real relief from the itching or the rash component. Now, this was the time when the patient came to me. This is not came to me, rather it was referred and the photographs shared. The rash had started becoming little reddish brown in color, and there was some amount of desquamation as well. The lesions had started to coalesce a bit. This you can see the trunk, the sides of the trunk, and you can also make out the desquamation part in the lower portions. This rash on the other side, inframammary region, the rash was almost involving the entire body. And during all these 2 months, this rash was accompanied by very, very severe or intense itching to the point that the patient was totally unable to sleep. And along with her sleeplessness, even the relatives were, in a fix because she kept awake, the relatives kept awake. And she also had complaints of burning sensation on areas of the rashes to the point that she was unable to bear the contact with even her loose clothing. So this was a very difficult situation for the patient as well as the relatives. So looking at the lesions or the photographs which the patients had shared from the first photographs and the next photographs when it was presented, I thought of two things, whether it is we are dealing with pityriasis rosea or whether the second possibility which came to my mind was whether it is pityriasis lichenoides. So the patient's relatives were counseled and they were told that we need to investigate this patient. And since it was a lockdown time, it was very difficult for her to come every time. So they said, whatever investigation you can tell us, you please inform us, we'll get it done. So the routine investigations, hematological investigations which were done, the hemogram was normal, ESR was not much raised, it was 16. The liver function test, the renal function test, they all were normal. Only as she was a diabetic, her blood sugar was in a range which was a little higher. On the PP side, it was postprandial, it was 210. And it was always the case, that's what the relative told me, that she was always 200 plus on postprandial levels. So a decision was made to get a biopsy done. She was an elderly lady. She was not very keen to visit the clinic. So she, after much convincing, the biopsy was done and the histopath that was reported showed the epidermis to be hyperkeratotic. It showed areas of focal parakeratosis. There was mild hyperplasia, moderate spongiosis, few dyskeratotic keratinocytes, and there was exocytosis of lymphocytes in the epidermis. The dermal pattern showed dilated capillaries, extravasated RBCs, perivascular lymphocytes, and few eosinophils with no atypical lymphocytes being noted. So the overall picture, the epidermal and dermal suggested that it is a case of P. rosea. Now here, after this treatment was started, as she was not responding to non-sedative or lower doses of antihistamines, I decided that let us put her on hydroxyzine hydrochloride. The patient and the relatives were ready for anything and everything. She was given 25 milligram at night time along with desloratad in the daytime. So 2 antihistamines to control the itching and the burning sensation which was there throughout the day and the night. She was also prescribed a combination or a combination of clobetasol and an emollient as a cream base. Despite that, there was not much relief. And as it was a case which was pushing me against the wall, I also decided to give this patient a short course of systemic steroids. After consulting the treating physician, the physician said, please go ahead, no problem, we'll see if the blood sugar or the blood pressure has to be managed, then let's see what is to be done. So a course of, say, I think I remember 8 to 10 days was given, short course, or 12 days maybe. But despite that, there was absolutely no response whatsoever. The pruritus was becoming more and more intense and the rash was also totally not under control. So I decided to once again speak with the physician and look for what possibly is the cause for this pruritus, itching and the rash which is not responding. I decided to take a look at the prescription. And in the prescription, I could see that there were many drugs which were given to control the diabetes and the hypertension. But amongst all the drugs, when probed or when spoken with the physician, I could find out there was one drug, that is tenagliptin, which was started about a month and a half before she started getting these complaints of rash and itching. So looking at this particular drug, I thought whether we are dealing with a tenagliptin-induced rash, maculopapular rash, or whether it is tenagliptin-induced P. rosea. So I decided to look up in the literature, and in the list of medications which have been associated, which have been proven to give a PR-like eruptions, you have a huge list. I mean, I have listed just maybe 29 or 30 over here. You can see that there are antihypertensives which are known to cause this kind of rashes, similar rashes, anticonvulsants also. Then there are a big list of vaccines like BCG, influenza vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, which are so commonly given. They also give rise to PR-like drug eruptions. And even biologicals, adalimumab, etanercept, rituximab, all these have been shown to give PR-like drug eruptions. And even the common drugs which we use in our day-to-day practice, like isotretinoin or omeprazole or terbinafine, also have been shown to give a PR-like drug eruption. But unfortunately, from this particular list as well as the literature search, I could not come across any gliptin which caused this PR-like drug eruption. So taking a look further in the literature, I thought let us see if clinically it fits into a PR-like drug eruption. So when I took a look at this description of this particular paper in JAAD, I saw that there were dusky red macules with a possible desquamation. with a diffuse distribution and confluent lesions on the trunk and the face. One important part was many times we don't get to see PR on the face. So this particular case had involvement of the face and the itching, which was intense as opposed to the itching which we see in the normal PR cases. So that actually set me thinking whether we are really dealing with a gliptin-induced PR-like drug eruption. So I decided, with the help of the physician, of course, I spoke to him and he said, yes, you can go ahead and stop gliptin and let's see what happens. So the gliptin was stopped, which was the last drug to be introduced before the patient had started getting this particular rash. So if you can see here, now the progression, once the gliptin was stopped, within 4 to 5 days, the rash started going down to a great extent. This is after 7 days. And this is after 2 weeks. The rash had virtually disappeared completely. This was the rash which I had projected in the previous slide. Extensive rash, confluent rash, somewhat exfoliating at places. And this is the rash which is after 7 days of stopping gliptin. All along for the last 3.5 to 4 months, the patient was in tremendous distress, having a lot of itching, burning, the rash not going down despite giving a very strong topical steroid, despite giving systemic steroids. But within 7 days of stopping gliptin, this was the picture. And this you can see, it's almost virtually completely cleared after 2 weeks of stopping this particular molecule, that is the gliptins. So the chronology in this particular case was initially the clinical impression and the histopath impression was suggestive of P. rosea. There was no response. The drug history had to be probed, had to withdraw teneligliptin, and it was seen that the rash or the symptoms improved very, very dramatically, drastically, very fast in this particular scenario. So let's take a quick look at what these gliptins are actually. These are, as you all must be knowing, these are all oral hypoglycemic agent. It's a dipeptidyl peptidase 4, DPP4 inhibitors. And these have been notorious, have been shown to cause many types of skin reaction, right from serious hypersensitivity reaction, including SJS, and remember one thing, that these, looking at the literature, I found that these rashes or the drug skin reactions can appear as long as 6 months after initiating gliptin also, or sometimes it can come up even after a single dose. Urticarial rashes have been documented in the literature. There are 1 or 2 case reports of localized painful maculopapular palmar rashes, persistent edematous plaque photosensitivity. In that case, this particular case, once the gliptin stopped, the patient can continue to get these rashes for a year or so as well. Even leukocytoclastic vasculitis, and we all know that bullous pemphigoid, which is one of the presentation in an elderly, this rash has also been shown and reported, documented by gliptin in the literature. So in a gist, if I were to summarize my case, that we should keep in mind that the drug rashes could actually mimic so many common skin conditions. Here, this particular case, I thought it was P. rosea all along. The histopath was also very much suggestive, but there was absolutely no response whatsoever. But stopping the incrementing drug, or the thing which actually clinched the decision to stop this particular drug, was going back to the prescription. So always it is important that one should take a very detailed history of the medications of the patients, especially in the elderly who are actually on polytherapy. And one has to remember that this drug hypersensitivity can happen at any point of time. So the duration from the onset of the drug to the skin rash, especially in the gliptin group, is highly variable. And withdrawing this particular suspected drug can lead to a dramatic improvement in the patient's condition. So I feel that this condition which I was dealing with or not able to manage well was a PR-like drug eruption, which was gliptin induced. With this, I end my presentation, and I would like to thank Dr. Mahajan sir for his histopath reporting. I would like to also thank Dr. Anil Patki sir and Dr. Sharad Mutalik sir for their various timely inputs for coming to a diagnosis in this particular case and managing this case. Thanks a lot. Thank you, team Pune IDVL, for giving me an opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation. Now we'll take up the questions from the audience, if any.
Yeah, there are 2 or 3 questions, Dr. Ritu. First question is for Dr. Nitin Chaudhary. Can you elaborate a bit on the treatment of atypical mycobacteria and why 3 months were given? 3 months treatment was given to your patient, or that is the recommendation?
Yes. For this Mycobacterium abscesses, the treatment can be given, OD basis. That is everyday basis. We have to give these antibiotics for not only 3 months. You can even have to give up to 6 months. So, and the drugs are routine anti-tubercular drugs are not effective.
So it is a different regimen, and either 3 or 6 months is the treatment duration that is
Yes.
recommended.
Yes. And
So in your patient, because the lesions improved in 3 months, you stop the treatment at the
yes,
end of
yes,
3 months.
yes.
And can you tell us a bit about this Malditoff assay that you have done in this patient? What is it? How it is to be done?
No, I'm
How
not.
expensive it is?
I don't know about the details of the test, but it was done in consultation with the chest physician.
Okay, so is it a blood test or it is a tissue test, and how costly it is?
No, it was not so costly, but it is done for knowing the subspecies of atypical Mycobacter.
So it is somewhat like a culture.
Culture.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there is for you, Dr. Dhananjay Damle, were there any eosinophils present in the blood?
Peripheral eosinophilia was not there. No, peripheral eosinophilia was on the upper side. It was 6 or something, 6%, but it was not greatly raised.
And even in the tissue, the eosinophils were
very few eosinophils were there. Very few eosinophils.
Yeah, because usually the drug-induced ones should have eosinophils. So how will you differentiate this from drug-induced hypersensitivity like DIH or maybe DIHS and the rash that you mentioned? So should we label it as drug-induced hypersensitivity which had a morphology like this, or it is a PR-like eruption? So what is your...
It is, according to me, it should be labeled as PR-like eruption secondary to gliptin. So it started 1.5 months after the drug was started. Okay. And stopping the drug, if we are getting a complete response, that goes in favor of a gliptin-induced drug rash, which appeared much later.
So then can we label it as drug-induced hypersensitivity, not DIHS, because patient did not have any systemic symptoms, patient did not have any eosinophils?
Absolutely no symptoms. Yes, only complaint.
So can we just label it as drug-induced hypersensitivity in this patient?
It's very difficult to say, madam, because I feel it is a PR-like drug eruption secondary to gliptin. I would label it as that.
Okay. One more question for Dr. Nitin. In your second case, which you showed, that is of the granulomatous rosacea, is there any role of ivermectin oral and topical?
Yes, topical ivermectin is given along with tacrolimus on alternate day.
And tacrolimus, do you feel that the irritation when it is active inflamed stage, will it cause more irritations, and how will it work in this granulomatous rosacea? Topical tacrolimus on a sensitive skin is usually quite irritant, and your patient had a very severe inflamed lesions on the face. So
it was given an alternate day, generally, along with the ivermectin cream.
Ivermectin was also given topically. Alternately, tacrolimus.
Along with the tacrolimus.
And any oral ivermectin was given to your patient?
Only single dose was given.
And how will you maintain this patient now? Only topically, or you would like to put the patient on oral doxycycline for longer time?
Doxycycline did not help in our case. We initially started the patient on doxycycline. It didn't help at all.
So what are you planning to give her in the long-term basis?
Actually, just photoprotection and protection.
No topical therapy.
No topical therapy.
She's still on isotretinoin.
No, isotretinoin also stopped. No.
Because many of these patients are known to be recurrent, so like sometimes you need to put them on a long-term maintenance therapy. So I wanted to know what is your choice for long-term maintenance therapy in patients of maybe say granulomatous or even the rosacea otherwise.
Isotretinoin would be better.
And is there any role of light and laser-based therapies in this patient?
We didn't try it.
Okay. I think Dr. Mutalik sir has some question or a comment.
Tacrolimus, instead of tacrolimus, it's better to use pimecrolimus cream base. And in case you want to use tacrolimus, keep it in the refrigerator before applying for 10 minutes.
Yeah, that reduces the irritation quite a bit. There is a question from Dr. Dhuble actually regarding the Covishield vaccination and the cutaneous eruptions. So he is saying that he has seen 2 patients who gave this history and rash. So any one of you can take this question. Have you seen post-Covishield or maybe post-Covaxin any cutaneous eruptions which were specifically related to the vaccination or maybe flaring up of the pre-existing skin condition?
I have seen cases of herpes zoster about a week to 15 days after the vaccination. A lot of cases who report, when you take a counter history, back history, they say that I have taken a Covishield vaccine, not Covaxin. And also I've seen cases of P. rosea also coming up 2 weeks or 3 weeks after the Covishield vaccine. So these are the 2 conditions which I'm seeing. And psoriatic patients, I've seen flare-ups.
And dermographism, many patients are coming up now.
Yeah, urticarial eruptions, milder types. And most of them are, I would say, short-lived rashes and with symptomatic treatment, many of them are improving.
Correct.
Right? Do you want to add anything, Dr. Nitin?
Sir, you're on mute.
No addition.
Dr. Dhananjay, Dr. Sandeep Arsad wants to know, in pityriasis rosea, do you get such severe itching?
Very rarely. I feel the classical cases, we don't get so much of itching. Most of them are no itching to mild itching, mild to moderate.
I think in the intense pruritus would go more in favor of a drug-induced cause, like because when your eruptions are not improving and when there are intensely pruritic, most of the time some drug is the culprit. That is what is my experience. So I think intense pruritus not responding to the conventional therapy made you think of a drug-induced cause in this
In
case.
fact, the histopath report, when it came as P. rosea, that time I was also confused that how come this P. rosea, which is showing features suggestive of P. rosea, is so pruritic. So that's why I had to go back to the prescription again and see. I had missed it on the first visit actually, their first teleconsult.
Yeah. Dr. Pradyumna, you have any question?
No, madam.
Dr. Vinay Kulkarni has commented that this test is done on a culture, the test for atypical mycobacteria. I think we have answered all the questions from the chat box. So I think we can move ahead with the presentation by Dr. Patki sir. So Ritu, can you please take over?
Play the slide now.
Yeah, I will.
Moving on to the main highlight of the CME today is the oration by Dr. Anil Patki sir. Sir has been practicing in Pune since 1986. He has been an honorary consultant at Ruby Hall Clinic from 1992 to 2016 and has worked at the Dr. Bandurawala Leprosy Hospital for 7 years and is currently attached to Dinanath Mangeshkar Hospital. He has more than 40 publications in national and international journals. Sir will be talking on his journey in the field of clinical leprosy. So you can take over.
Yeah. Can you show the first slide, please? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, just a minute, sir. I am just.
Yeah, it's okay. Till that time, just I would like to thank Dhanashri and all the team members of Pune chapter for giving me this opportunity to present my oration. And I had the opportunity to present this at the IAL conference, National Conference of the Indian Association of Leprologists. And I would like to describe my journey in the field of clinical leprosy, starting from the time that I started working in a leprosy hospital and till the time that I have been working even now.
Give me a minute, sir.
Yeah.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am. Make it full screen.
I'm making it full screen. Just a minute. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, see, in this oration, I would be talking about presenting my thoughts, some hypotheses, some observations, and some clinical findings which have received scant attention in textbooks and mainstream leprosy journals. Next slide. As we know, just as an introduction, leprosy is still an enigma. It was the first human disease to be associated with a bacterium, namely Mycobacterium leprae, which is not cultivable in vitro. As we know, it's an extremely slow disease with a very long, prolonged incubation period, slow development of the disease, slow improvement after treatment, and relapse occurring after years and years. It has got a very wide clinical, bacteriological, pathological, and immunological spectrum, which is not commonly seen in any other infectious disease. And most important thing is that this is the disease where bacilli directly infect the nerves, resulting in sensory motor deficits and deformities, which are responsible for the great social stigma that is associated with leprosy. Next slide. Now, this is the place where my journey began. This is Dr. Bandurwala Leprosy Hospital, Kushtarog Rugnalay. This is the gate. It is a tertiary referral center run by Pune District Leprosy. And that time it was run by PDLC, which was headed by Padma Bhushan Dr. Jal Mehta, who gave me an opportunity to work in this hospital, along with senior colleagues like Dr. Vittal Jadhav and Dr. Sanjay Sani. And these two were extremely helpful to me during my work over here. We used to provide chemotherapy, physiotherapy, reconstructive surgery, rehabilitation, and vocational therapy as well. At that time, remember that prevalence of leprosy in India was around 5 per 1,000, which was quite high. And we had at any time between 300 to 400 indoor leprosy patients having various reactions and trophic ulcers, patients admitted for surgery, and about 50 to 100 patients in our OPD every day. That was the prevalence and that was the workload in the leprosy hospital. Next slide. That is me in my younger form. And this was the new building which got erected with the help of Helpage India when I was working over there. And the older OPD was shifted in this newer building after the construction of this particular building. Next slide. Now we will come to the enigma of the first lesion. I was always intrigued by the question of how the first lesion appears. Now, what is the route of entry? The route of entry of the bacilli is most likely to be the respiratory tract, but it could also be the skin or the gut. We are not sure. The first or the single lesion of leprosy is more likely to be present on the exposed parts of the body in adults. This is the epidemiological finding in study of large number of leprosy patients. But the first lesion, interestingly, in children is randomly distributed. It could be either covered area or exposed area. Now, what we think is that the minor breaches in the skin, like abrasions, insect bites, and scabies, may work as entry points for the bacilli. Because the bacilli are quite inert, they are non-motile, and they are relatively non-toxic. Next slide. Now we came to this hypothesis about the first lesion of leprosy. There are certain observations which are very well known, like the skin malignancies in fair-skinned individuals are common on the sun-exposed parts of the body. We all know that. Now, why this happens is that the solar ultraviolet radiation causes abrogation of antigen-presenting function of Langerhans cells which are present in the epidermis. Immunosuppression caused by the solar UV radiation at the entry point of the bacilli in the skin may be responsible for the first lesion of leprosy. Now we came to this hypothesis based on these observations. A breach in the skin could serve as the entry point for bacilli, as proven by the cases of inoculation leprosy. There are certain cases where tattooing or dog bite injury has given rise to leprosy lesions. The first cells in the immune system encountered by the bacilli are the Langerhans cells in the epidermis. And when the function of Langerhans cells is impaired, that allows the bacilli to reach the subepidermal zone and set up a lesion of leprosy. I sent this hypothesis to Lancet, but it came back with a very terse comment that let it see the light of the sun in some other journal. So I sent it to International Journal of Leprosy, where Dr. Hastings, the famous leprologist, was the editor at that time. And to my surprise, he published it in International Journal of Leprosy in 1991. Next slide, please. Other points in favor of this hypothesis were the geographic distribution, which is, as we know, it is in the tropics and subtropics, which receive maximum quantum of solar radiation. The first lesion in adults is most often present on the exposed or unclothed parts of the body, which are subject to injuries. And some studies of early leprosy lesions favor skin as the point of entry. And Langerhans cell number is reduced in the lesional skin of TT and BT leprosy. That is another proof that the impairment of the function of Langerhans cells is there in the first lesion of leprosy. This was hypothesis published in 1991, but I could not prove it because of the lack of resources. I think it can be proved now by conducting lepromin tests in normal and UV irradiated skin. What are the implications? Will photoprotection prevent at least the initial lesion of some patients of leprosy? So that is the question. That is a very moot question. And I would like to get an answer for this with some newer research. Next slide. Now then, we came to the dermatological problems in indoor leprosy patients. There were so many conditions which occur in normal patients, which are seen in leprosy patients also. So we conducted a study of all indoor patients, and among 366 patients, ichthysis was the most common finding. Patients with scabies, there were certain observations which were not hitherto described, and we found that patients with scabies did not have lesions in the webs of the hands, probably because of the dry and hyperkeratotic skin is not suitable for burrowing by the mites. And the important and interesting thing which was not hitherto described, we found was the verrucous skin lesions on the anterior aspects of the ankles. And in the initial report, we found 4 patients amongst 366 patients. Next slide, please. Now, these lesions are very typical. They are found on the legs of leprosy patients, and we found that there were 3 morphological variants. Number 1 was lesions resembling filiform warts. Number 2 was compact hyperkeratosis lesions with deep fissures in between. And the number 3 morphology was hyperkeratosis with transverse fissures. And this got published in Indian Journal of Leprosy in 1992. Next slide. So these are some of the old photographs. On the left side, you see some lesions with deep fissures, hyperkeratotic horn-like structures with deep fissures. On the right side, if you see carefully, there are filiform wart-like lesions, and there are deep fissures in between also. Next slide. Now we could thought of three etiological factors. One is sensory neuropathy. The lesions, the area of the lesions was almost always hypoesthetic or anesthetic. There is also autonomic neuropathy with reduced sweating. And the third important factor was irritation by the tongue of the plastic footwear that these patients use while walking around. Now coming to the treatment, we treated these patients with chemical cauterization with salicylic acid and lactic acid and podophyllene. And the hyperkeratotic type of lesions were treated with topical steroid plus salicylic acid combination, along with advice for a proper footwear and prevention of the lesions by using moisturization of the area. Next slide. Now, this particular finding was later on confirmed by authors in Europe, and they described a 45-year-old obese diabetic man who developed verrucous skin lesions on the first metatarsal head. The site was different, but it was an anesthetic foot, starting after a walk of several hours wearing new hiking shoes. And they thought that these lesions were similar to what we had described. And they also reported that chronic pressure or friction in an area of sensory loss is responsible for development of these lesions. And they claimed that these are similar to the lesions on the feet of leprosy patients. And this was published in British Journal of Dermatology. Next research project in the hospital was study of nail lesions in leprosy patients, which was never studied by anybody earlier. And we could find that there are multitude of nail changes in leprosy which were not described or classified. And for this, I tried to collaborate with Dr. Robert Barrat, the renowned nail expert from France. Remember, those were the days when you had to put a letter, and it took around 15 days to reach the recipient in Europe. And then again, we have to wait for 15 days for his reply. So those were the days of the snail mail, and it took a very long time to communicate with people. So we communicated with him, and after collaboration, we described certain nail changes like Bowes lines, dorsal pterygium, ventral pterygium, and horn-like nail. And we also devised a classification of nail changes in leprosy. Next slide. Now, this is a very rough sketch of the classification. The first group is neuropathy and trauma, which includes conditions like, this is the etiological classification. The neuropathy and trauma give rise to subungual hematoma, onycholysis, onychauxis, which is thickening of the nail, onychogryphosis, which is thickening with curvature. Both ventral and dorsal pterygium were described. Ectopic nail, the nail which is present at some different site because of the shifting of the matrix due to trauma. Spicule nail deformity and complete loss of nail. Second classification group was vascular deficit, which can give rise to thinning of the nail, longitudinal splits, onychauxis, pterygium, both dorsal and ventral, and atrophy of the nail. Repeated infections, which could be either bacterial or fungal infection, can give rise to some nail changes, and there are certain miscellaneous changes like Bowes lines and pallor. Next slide. Now, Bowes lines are transverse lines on the nail plate due to sudden arrest of the nail matrix, and these lines will migrate distally with the growth of the nail. And the time of the insult can be judged by distance of the line from the proximal nail fold, because we know the approximate rate of growth of the nail. Next slide. The first case of Bowes lines we described was with Dapsone syndrome. Now, sudden onset of erythroderma because of Dapsone syndrome gives rise to arrest of the nail matrix. And Dapsone syndrome, as we know, is a hypersensitivity syndrome with skin rash, eosinophilia, and raised hepatic enzymes. And this patient was a 35-year-old female with BL leprosy who developed sudden onset of erythroderma due to Dapson's hypersensitivity, and she developed Boo's lines. And we got this published in Leprosy Review in 1989. Next slide. Other case that we described was a case who developed multiple Boo's lines. And in this case, it was the recurrent type 2 lepra reaction was responsible for development of multiple Boo's lines. Now we know that type 2 lepra reaction is an immune complex disease with protein manifestations. And we had a male patient who had recurrent TNL and displayed multiple Boo's lines. And we postulated that vasculitis and obliteration of the arterioles was responsible for Boo's lines, which was published in Archives of Dermatology in 1990. Next slide. Now coming to the pterygium. Now, as we know, pterygium is a wing-like structure. Dorsal pterygium is an extension of the proximal nail fold over the nail plate. And this is the patient with dorsal pterygium, and this picture has been published in Baron's book also. Damage to the nail matrix causes defective nail plate formation, which causes the proximal nail fold to grow over the nail plate. In leprosy, sensory loss causes recurrent unrecognized trauma and damage to the nail matrix. And also sometimes a type 2 lepra reaction causes vasculitis and end arteritis, causing damage to the nail matrix, giving rise to pterygium formation. Next slide. Coming to the pterygium inversum unguis. This is a relatively recently developed condition. The first case of pterygium inversum unguis, or ventral pterygium, as also known as ventral pterygium, this was described in case of scleroderma. And we described the first case of ventral pterygium in patient of leprosy. Now, what is ventral pterygium? Ventral pterygium is the distal extension of the hyponychium and its fusion with the undersurface of the nail plate. And it is because of the microvascular ischemia. It was described first in scleroderma and attributed to peripheral ischemia, ulceration, and scarring. And we described it in leprosy, and it was published in Archives of Dermatology in 1990. Next slide. Now coming to this condition of horn-like nail. Now, why does the nail grow forward and not upward? Certain experiments were conducted by Dr. Albert Kligman. He transplanted the nail matrix onto the forearm and then found that the nail growth occurred straight up like a horn. But in normal situation, the nail grows forwards because of molding by a cul-de-sac, which is formed by the proximal and lateral nail folds and the bone of the distal phalanx. The bone of the distal phalanx gives pressure from undersurface, and that this cul-de-sac gives rise to forward growth of the nail plate. Now, what will happen if the bone is lost, or the distal part of the bone is destroyed? When the distal part of the bone is destroyed, the phalanx bone is destroyed, there is a change in the orientation of the matrix. The matrix gets curved over the distal phalanx. And this orientation change of the matrix gives rise to a nail resembling cutaneous horn, and which occurs after the acral bone loss. This particular finding was published in Cutis in 1994. Next slide. Now, this picture shows certain nail changes. On the left side, you see horn-like nails. In the middle picture, you see complete nail loss. And on the right-hand side, you see some longitudinal fissuring and also fungal infection, that is onychomycosis of the nail. Next slide. Now, this was another interesting finding, and I had opportunity to discuss with Dr. Bhartia just yesterday. Now, we have several patients who are cured of leprosy but continue to get trophic ulcers, and these trophic ulcers get infected. Now, what happens is that when the trophic ulcer in a cured leprosy patient is infected, it gives rise to severe pain and swelling. And then if you palpate the posterior tibial nerve, you often find that it is tender. And because tenderness of the nerve is regarded as a sign of activity of leprosy, it can be misinterpreted as active leprosy disease, which is not the case. So many cured patients of leprosy are left with residual nerve damage with insensitive feet. And this tenderness often subsides after treatment of the secondary infection. So the tenderness of the posterior tibial nerve in a patient with trophic ulcer must be interpreted only after complete treatment of the trophic ulcers with antibiotics. Because we have observed that many times this tenderness subsides after the treatment of the secondary infection of the trophic ulcer. And most probably it is because of the inflamed lymphatics which run along the nerve. The tenderness of the nerve could be mistaken for disease activity and may be mistaken for a relapse or a revulsal reaction. This particular finding was published in the International Journal of Leprosy. Next slide, please. Now, I was very pleasantly surprised that Dr. H. Srinivasan, the renowned the reconstructive surgeon, he agreed with our findings, and he had written in short, in the old dapsone monotherapy days, this clinical phenomenon was not very much stressed. And also it did not matter also because the treatment continued. We did not have a short course chemotherapy or something like that. However, then the situation is today is quite different, and a patient who has already been treated and discharged as cure may easily diagnose disease activity with acute neuritis, and then again the patient may be unnecessarily put on anti-leprosy therapy. So this finding is very important to remember. Next slide, please. Now, there are certain things that we see while working in a leprosy hospital, and here you see, can you see the transverse branding marks on the forearm? So this patient had a very severe neuritis of the cutaneous nerve of the forearm, and there was no nearby doctor. He went to a quack and he was treated with these branding marks. It was quite horrific to start with, but fortunately these marks, the branding marks healed and he became okay after some time. So there are certain interesting things that we see caused by the quacks. Next slide. So leprosy is a disease with protean dermatological manifestations which need to be addressed in order to provide a holistic therapeutic approach. And I thank you all for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for a very interesting and elusive presentation. We will now request Dr. Priyank Shah from Sun Pharma for the corporate presentation.
Yeah, I'm just presenting my screen.
Before that, there was a question for Patki sir from Mutalik sir. Can I ask it?
Yeah, sure, doctor. Please go ahead.
Patki sir, Mutalik sir wants to know, has the incidence of deformities gone down after the newer anti-leprosy drugs?
Definitely. With anti-leprosy therapy, we have a WHO anti-leprosy therapy. The deformity rate has definitely gone down, and we hardly ever see deformities in new patients because many of the patients get treated early, and even the number of leprosy patients has reduced, the prevalence has reduced, but unfortunately the incidence is not reducing that much. So deformity rate has definitely reduced. I have not seen a patient with depressed bridge of nose for last maybe 10 or 15 years.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ma'am, can we go ahead?
Yeah, we can.
Dr. Priyank Shah, over to you.
Yes, I will present my screen. Yeah. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Dhanashree ma'am and the entire Pune IDVL team for giving us the opportunity to talk about our molecule, which is the low-dose micronized isotretinoin, which is available in the market under the brand name of Sotret NF. So I will be very brief. So if we talk about the isotretinoin, all the major guidelines, be it AAD, European, or even Indian Acne Alliance, they recommend the usage of isotretinoin in severe nodular acne and in moderate acne when the scarring is possible and when the patient is unresponsive to oral antibiotics and a topical combination. But the problem which occurs with this conventional isotretinoin is that it is supposed to be taken with the food. and to be very precise, a higher fatty food, which leads to two basic problems, that it leads to a variable bioavailability, and poor patient adherence. In variable bioavailability, the absorption of the isotretinoin is dependent on the food. If the isotretinoin is taken on the fasted state, the plasma level of isotretinoin is approximately 60% lower if we compare it to the fed state. So that is the bigger problem when you take it within the fasted state. And the bioavailability is approximately 2 times post meal as compared to the fasted state. If we talk about the adherence, so there is a poor patient adherence which is seen in patients, approximately 46% of the patients. Adolescents and the young adults, because they wanted to stay in the very good shape, so there is an inconsistent eating patterns which has been noted, which results in the irregular dosing, and there is a considerable variation in the plasma level of isotretinoin even if taken daily for the appropriate duration of 15 to 20 weeks. So to overcome this, we have developed a patented micronized technology to provide the maximum drug absorption irrespective of food. So this is all the large particles of the isotretinoin, which are broken down into a very small particles in a lipid matrix. So this micronization, which helps in having this the properties which have substantially increased the surface area per unit mass, which in turn increases the bioavailability and thereby reducing the dose of isotretinoin by 20%. It can be given without regards to the meals, so it can be given in the fed state as well as in the fasted state. And it maintains the similar exposure and bioequivalence as the reference product, that is the conventional isotretinoin, despite the lower dosage. So there were 2 bioequivalence studies which were done, one in the Indian population, one in the US population. The paper has been published. So parameters which were checked were AUC, area under the curve, and the Cmax. And what was found is that the fed and the fasted micronized isotretinoin, it was found to be bioequivalent to the fed conventional isotretinoin. And if you see the area under the curve graph also, they all were bioequivalent. So lipid profile analysis also showed that the pre-dose and the post-dose level, they were comparable post a single dose of micronized isotretinoin capsule, 24 mg versus the reference product, 30 mg. This micronized isotretinoin, it is available in US under the brand name of Absorica LD. The same product is available in India under the brand name of Sotret NF. This product has been approved by DCGI in September 2020, so last year only. So this is the product profile. The dosage form, it is available in the soft gelatin capsule. And if you see the dosage is 20% lower than the conventional isotretinoin which is available in the market. So the conventional isotretinoin is 10, 20, 30. So this is 8 mg, 16 mg, and 24 mg. Treatment, the approved indication remains the same, so I will not go into that. But the dosage, if you see, is 0.4 to 0.8 mg per kg per day. And the duration is 15 to 20. And the main thing is it can be given with or without meals. In adults who are having the severe problem or the truncal acne, they can be given a dosage of 1.6 mg per kg per day. The duration of use, it remains the same as the conventional isotretinoin, that is 15 to 20 weeks. Now, in brief, if I wanted to compare the conventional isotretinoin versus the micronized isotretinoin, the main part is the dosage. The conventional is that are available in the strengths of 10 mg, 20, 30. Micronized is available in 8 mg and 60 and 24. So there's a 20% less dosing with this. The particle size has been reduced by 10 times. So if I consider the particle size of conventional as X, the micronized isotretinoin is 0.1x. Both the products, they are approved in India and USA as well. both have a similar indication. There is no technology which is available for conventional isotretinoin, but because of this micronization and the lipid encapsulation for Sotret NF, it enables the better drug absorption. If I talk about the PK, the conventional isotretinoin is supposed to be taken with meals to attain the full bioavailability. The micronized isotretinoin, it gives you the freedom to take it with or without food. Efficacy, they both have the similar efficacy, and there is a possible lower relapse rate with the micronized isotretinoin. So there will be a lesser chances of drug repetition. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you once again, Pune IDVL.
Rashmi? Rashmi, can you please take over?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So before we end the meeting and I propose my vote of thanks, as usual, I have a few announcements to make. There is a very good news that we have got our MMC accreditation, and from the next CME onwards, we will be getting our credit hours. So that is a really good news for us. The next announcement is that the next meeting will be held on the last Sunday of August, which I believe is the 29th, and the topic will be clinical rounds. With that out of the way, I would now like to thank our speakers, Dr. Sharvari Pandit, Dr. Nitin Chaudhary sir, Dr. Dhananjay Damle sir, and Dr. Patki sir for a very interesting evening. I would like to thank our academic partner, the Sun Pharma, for making this meeting glitch-free. And as usual, our audience, who have even joined today, even though it is so late at night, you always encourage us to give you better programs. Thank you so much. We can now end the meeting.
The recording has stopped.
Yeah, I think we are not live.